Maria Santos pulled her worn coat tighter against her thin frame as she stared out the frost-covered window of their small apartment. The blizzard had been raging for 3 days now, and the last of their food had been finished yesterday morning. Her 3 children, Sophia, 8 years old, little Pedro, 5, and baby Carmen, barely 18 months, had been asking for food since dawn. The electricity had been cut off 2 weeks ago when she couldn't pay the bill. Her husband, Roberto, had been laid off from the construction company 6 months earlier, and finding work in their small Montana town had proven impossible. He had left 3 weeks ago, promising to find work in the city, and through the window, she could see the small grocery store across the street. Old Mr. Peterson had been kind to them before, sometimes letting them buy food on credit when times were especially hard. But Maria knew she already owed him more than $200, and her pride had kept her from asking for more help. Now, watching her children's faces grow paler by the hour, pride seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. The wind howled outside, making the old windows rattle in their frames. Snow was piling up against the door, and Maria realized that even if she wanted to venture out, she had stopped asking for toys or treats weeks ago, and now she barely asked for food, though Maria could see the hunger in her daughter's careful movements and tired expression. Baby Carmen had been fussier than usual, crying often and refusing to settle. Maria knew the baby could sense the tension and fear in the household, even if she couldn't understand what was happening. The formula had run out days ago, and Maria had been giving Carmen small amounts of watered-down milk when she could find any. As the day wore on, the storm seemed to intensify rather than calm down. Maria The children needed food, and waiting another day might make them too weak to recover quickly even when food became available again. She remembered her grandmother's words from years ago, spoken in Spanish during a difficult time in Maria's childhood. Mija, sometimes a mother must be braver than she ever imagined possible. The strength comes not from yourself, but from the love you carry for your children. At the time, Maria had been too young to fully understand the meaning behind those words. Now, facing the worst crisis of her life, she felt their truth settling into her bones. Looking at her children huddled together on the old couch, sharing a thin blanket that had seen better days, Maria made her decision. She wrapped an extra sweater around her waist under her coat and tied a scarf around her head and face to protect against the freezing wind. Sophia watched her mother's preparations with worried eyes. Even at 8 years old, she understood that going outside in this weather was dangerous. But she also understood that they needed help and that their mama was the only one who could get it for them. The little girl didn't say anything, but she held Pedro and baby Carmen a little tighter as they watched their mother get ready to face the storm. The last thing Maria did before opening the door was kneel down and hug each of her children. She looked into Sophia's serious dark eyes and said, the cold hit her like a physical blow, taking her breath away and making her eyes water instantly. The world outside had been transformed into a white nightmare. The snow was already knee-deep in some places, and the wind was so strong it was hard to stand upright. Maria could barely see the grocery store across the street through the swirling snow and darkness. Street lights flickered weakly, casting strange shadows that made it difficult to judge distances or directions. She took her first step into the storm and immediately felt her foot sink deep into a snowdrift. The cold snow went over the top of Roberto's boots and soaked through her socks, but Maria For a moment, panic rose in her chest as she imagined getting lost in this storm, leaving her children alone and helpless. But she forced herself to keep moving forward, knowing that going back now would mean giving up on the only chance they had. The wind seemed to have a voice of its own, howling and shrieking around her as she struggled through the snow. Her hands were already numb despite her gloves, and her face felt like it was being stung by thousands of needles as the wind-driven snow hit her exposed skin. But Maria kept Roberto's words in her mind, something he had told her years ago when they first met. "You are stronger than you know, Maria. You just have to trust yourself to find that strength when..." Maria felt tears starting to freeze on her cheeks as despair washed over her. She had risked everything to make this journey, and now she was standing in a blizzard with no solution for her children's hunger. The wind seemed to mock her as it howled around the building, making her realize how foolish she had been to think this plan would work. Standing there in the storm, Maria noticed that her fingers and toes were starting to feel numb, which she knew was a dangerous sign. She needed to find shelter quickly or risk serious frostbite. Looking around desperately, she spotted a faint glow of light coming from somewhere further down the street. It was hard to tell exactly where it was coming from through the blowing snow, but it was the only sign of life she could see. As she got closer, Maria could see that the light was coming from a large house set back from the road behind a circular driveway. It was clearly the home of someone wealthy, with tall windows, elegant stonework, and what looked like a stable or barn visible behind the main building. Even in the storm, she could tell this was the kind of place where people had plenty of food and warmth the kind of life that seemed impossible for families like hers. Maria hesitated at the end of the long driveway. Her pride whispered that she shouldn't beg from strangers, especially wealthy strangers who probably wouldn't understand her situation. But louder than pride was the memory of Pedro's thin face and baby Carmen's weak cries. Her children were depending on her, and for a long moment, she stood on the covered porch, trying to work up the courage to knock. Through the tall windows beside the door, she could see glimpses of a warm, well-lit interior. There were paintings on the walls, comfortable furniture, and what looked like a fire burning in a fireplace. It was like looking into a different world, one where storms were just something to watch from inside, rather than something that threatened your family's survival. Finally, Maria raised her numb hand and knocked on the door. The sound seemed small and insignificant against the roaring of the storm behind her. She waited, but heard no movement inside. Perhaps her knock had been too quiet, or perhaps the people in He looked surprised to see anyone standing on his doorstep in such weather. "Good heavens," he said, looking Maria up and down with concern. "What are you doing out in this storm? Are you hurt? Do you need help?" Maria tried to speak, but the cold had made her jaw stiff, and her voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Please, sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but my children, they haven't eaten in 2 days. I live across the street from Peterson's store, and I was trying to find food, but everything is closed." The man's expression immediately changed to one of alarm and sympathy. "My God, you walked through this blizzard?" "We'll worry about everything else once you're warm and safe." The warmth of the house hit Maria like a wave, making her realize just how cold she had become. Her fingers and toes immediately began to tingle painfully as feelings started returning to them. The interior was even more impressive than what she had glimpsed through the windows, with high ceilings, elegant furniture, and artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. "My name is James Harrison," the man said as he helped Maria out of her wet coat. "And you're going to sit by the fire while I get you something warm to drink and figure out how to help your children." Maria felt overwhelmed by his. The contrast between the cozy warmth of the house and the dangerous cold she had just escaped made Maria feel dizzy with relief. But even as she began to warm up, her thoughts remained focused on her children back in the cold apartment. "Tell me about your situation," James said as he handed her a steaming cup of hot chocolate. "How many children do you have? And how long have you been without food?" The hot chocolate was the most delicious thing Maria had tasted in weeks. The warmth spread through her body, giving her strength to speak more clearly. "I have 3 children," she began, her voice still shaky. "Sophia is..." She found herself sharing details she had never told anyone, perhaps because she knew this stranger had no reason to judge her and every reason to help. "The last of our food ran out yesterday morning," Maria continued. "I've been giving the children little sips of water to help them feel less hungry, but I know they can't go much longer without real food. That's why I risked coming out in the storm. I was desperate." When she finished her story, James was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire with a thoughtful expression. Maria began to worry that perhaps she had said too much, that maybe he was reconsidering his offer to help. Rich But they were counting on me, and I couldn't let them down. James nodded with understanding. "That's exactly what makes it brave," he said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." He stood up from his chair and walked to the window, looking out at the still raging storm. "Now, let's figure out how to get help to your children tonight." James Harrison walked to his kitchen and began gathering supplies while Maria waited anxiously by the fire. She could hear him moving around, opening cabinets, and what sounded like the refrigerator. The smell of food began to drift into the living room, making her stomach growl loudly and remind and if she got lost or injured on the way back, her children would be in an even worse situation than before. But she couldn't bear the thought of staying here in warmth and safety while they remained hungry and cold. "I have to try," she said, standing up from the comfortable chair. "They're waiting for me. Sophia is taking care of the little ones, but she's just a child herself. They'll be scared and hungry, and they don't understand where I went." James appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "I understand your urgency, but I have a better idea. I'm going to drive you back to your apartment in my truck. It has 4-wheel drive, and..." "I grew up in Montana, and my truck is equipped for severe weather. Besides, I have a daughter myself, though she's grown now and lives in California. If she were ever in the situation your children are in right now, I would hope someone would help her the way I'm going to help your family." The mention of his daughter made Maria realize that James understood her desperation not just as a kind stranger, but as a parent himself. That knowledge made her feel less alone in her struggle, and she found herself trusting him completely. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so scared that I wouldn't be able to help them tonight." "There's no need to thank me." There was baby formula for Carmen, and even some small toys that must have been left over from when James's own daughter was young. "This is too much," Maria protested, overwhelmed by the generosity. "I can't accept all of this. Maybe just some bread and milk for tonight, and I'll find a way to pay you back as soon as possible." James shook his head firmly. "Maria, I want you to listen to me carefully. You walked through a dangerous blizzard to save your children. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of person and mother you are. This food is a gift, not a loan. Your only job is to take care of your family." While they were talking, Maria heard a strange sound from outside. The idea that someone could own horses as pets, rather than for work, represented a level of wealth that was hard for her to comprehend. "I raise and train horses," James explained as he continued packing supplies into bags. "It's been my business and passion for over 20 years. Some people think I'm crazy for keeping them in weather like this, but horses are tougher than most people realize. Besides, they're family to me." The mention of horses reminded Maria of stories her grandfather used to tell about growing up on a ranch in Mexico, where horses were working animals that helped. "Are you ready for another trip through the storm?" Maria pulled her still damp coat back on, grateful that it had dried somewhat during her time by the fire. "I'm ready," she said, though she was actually nervous about venturing back into the blizzard. The warmth and safety of James's house had made the storm outside seem like a distant nightmare, but she knew it was still raging just beyond the walls. They loaded the bags of supplies into James's truck, a large vehicle that looked like it could handle almost any weather condition. The garage protected them from the worst of the wind and snow, but Maria could hear the storm continuing to rage outside. When James opened the garage door, the truck's headlights could barely penetrate the swirling snow, and several times James had to stop completely when the wind threatened to push them off course. Maria found herself gripping the door handle and praying silently in Spanish, words her grandmother had taught her for times of great fear or uncertainty. Through the passenger window, she tried to spot her apartment building, but everything looked different, covered in snow and darkness. The familiar landmarks of her neighborhood had been transformed into an alien landscape of white drifts and shadows. For a moment, she worried they might not be able to find the right building, leaving her children waiting while she sat. "Your children are probably wondering where you are. Let's get this food upstairs to them." They gathered the bags of supplies and fought their way through the snow to the building's entrance. The front door was nearly blocked by a drift that had formed against it, and James had to push hard to get it open far enough for them to squeeze through. Once inside the building, Maria felt a mixture of relief at being out of the storm and nervousness about James seeing the poverty of their living situation. The stairs up to their second-floor apartment creaked under their weight, and Maria was acutely aware of the peeling paint on the walls and the worn carpet that hadn't been replaced. The sound of her 8-year-old daughter trying to be brave and responsible made Maria's heart ache with both pride and sadness. "My children," Maria said quietly as she fumbled for her key with numb fingers. "They've been so good through all of this, but they shouldn't have to be this strong. Children should be allowed to just be children." James nodded with understanding. "They sound like remarkable kids," he said. "But you're right. They shouldn't have to handle adult problems. That's about to change, though. Tonight, there's going to be children who are warm, fed, and safe." When Maria opened, we could hear the wind getting louder and louder, and Pedro kept asking when you were coming back. Little Pedro nodded seriously, his thin face showing the strain of trying to be brave while his mother was gone. "I took care of Carmen like you said, Mama. She cried a little, but Sophia helped me make her feel better." Baby Carmen reached her small arms up toward Maria, babbling in the way that meant she wanted to be picked up and held. But before Maria could respond to her children's greetings, she realized they had all noticed the tall stranger standing behind her in the doorway, along with the bags of supplies he The apartment was tiny, with just 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, and a living room that served as dining room and play area. The furniture was old and worn, and without electricity, the only light came from candles and the small fire they had been burning in a metal bucket. But instead of looking uncomfortable or superior, James seemed genuinely moved by the family situation. He knelt down to the children's level and spoke directly to them with warmth and respect. "Hello, Sophia, Pedro, and Carmen. Your mama is one of the bravest people I've ever met. She walked through a terrible storm tonight to make sure you would have food." Sophia looked up at James with curious eyes, taking "Is there really food in there?" he asked hopefully. "We've been really hungry, and our tummies hurt." "Yes, there's definitely food," James assured him. "Would you like to help me unpack it?" For the next few minutes, the small apartment was filled with excitement as James and the children unpacked the groceries. There was bread, fresh milk, eggs, cheese, fruit, and even some cookies that made Pedro gasp with delight. The baby formula for Carmen made Maria tear up with relief, knowing she would finally be able to properly feed her youngest child. But James wasn't finished with his surprises. From the last bag, he pulled out a small camping lantern that we can't pay you back right now. James paused in his unpacking and looked seriously at the little girl. Sophia, sometimes in life, people help each other just because it's the right thing to do. Your mama would help someone else if they needed it, and she could, wouldn't she? Sophia nodded emphatically. Mama always shares our food with Mrs. Rodriguez next door when her Social Security check is late, even when we don't have very much. Exactly, James said. Helping each other is what makes us human. Tonight, I have the ability to help your family, so that's what I'm going to do. While they were talking, Maria had been quietly preparing a simple. He described the different personalities of each horse, making the children laugh with tales of their amusing behavior and clever tricks. Pedro was especially fascinated by stories about the horses playing in the snow, and Carmen clapped her hands when James made horse sounds. Do you think we could see your horses sometime? Sophia asked shyly. I've never seen a real horse up close, except in pictures. I think that could be arranged, James said with a smile. Once this storm passes and the roads are clear, you and your family are welcome to visit the ranch. As the evening progressed, Maria found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Her As he worked, he continued chatting with the children, asking them about their favorite subjects in school and their dreams for the future. Sophia told him she wanted to become a teacher, and Pedro announced his intention to be a veterinarian so he could take care of animals like James's horses. Those are wonderful goals, James told them. Education is very important. Are you able to keep up with your schoolwork even with everything that's been happening? Sophia's expression grew more serious. Sometimes it's hard to concentrate when we're hungry, she admitted. And we don't have a computer or internet. The constant howling of the wind had decreased to occasional gusts, and the snow didn't seem to be falling as heavily as before. James checked his phone and confirmed that the weather service was predicting the storm would move out of the area by morning. I should probably head back soon, James said, though he seemed reluctant to leave the warm family gathering. But before I go, I want to make sure you have my phone number. If you need anything at all, or if Roberto doesn't return with work soon, I want you to call me. He wrote his contact information on a piece of paper and handed it to Maria. I mean it, he said seriously. Don't let pride keep you from asking for help if you need it. Your children are lucky. Remember, heroes come in all different forms. Your mama is a hero too, for braving that storm to take care of you. Sophia also hugged James goodbye, and even baby Carmen waved her tiny hand at him from her mother's arms. As the family stood in the doorway watching James make his way back to his truck, Maria felt overwhelmed with gratitude not just for the food and supplies, but for the kindness and respect he had shown her children. The truck's headlights cut through the diminishing snow as James carefully drove back toward his ranch. Through the apartment window, Maria watched until the lights disappeared around a corner, then closed the door and turned back to her family. For the first time in weeks, Maria had slept deeply, no longer kept awake by worry about how she would feed her children the next day. Sophia was already awake, sitting quietly at the small table and looking at the remaining groceries that James had brought the night before. "Mama," she whispered when she saw Maria stirring, "I keep thinking last night was a dream. Did that nice man really bring us all this food?" "It wasn't a dream, Mija," Maria said softly, getting up to start breakfast for her children. The camping stove that James had provided worked perfectly, and soon the apartment was filled with the wonderful smell of eggs cooking and bread toasting. Pedro and baby Carmen woke up to these promising aromas. After breakfast, Maria decided to venture outside to assess the damage from a storm and see if any neighbors needed help. The world had been transformed overnight. Snow drifts reached up to the windows of cars, and the trees looked like they were wearing thick white coats. But the sun was shining brightly, and the air was crisp and clean in a way that made everything feel fresh and new. Mr. Peterson was outside his grocery store, shoveling snow away from the entrance. When he saw Maria, he waved and called out to her, "Maria, I was worried about you and the children during the storm. How did you manage?" Maria walked over. "I was planning to bring some supplies over to your apartment later, but you seem like maybe things are better now." Maria smiled gratefully at the older man's concern. "You're very kind, Mr. Peterson. Things are better today, but I won't forget that you were thinking of us." As she walked back toward her apartment building, Maria noticed other neighbors emerging from their homes to begin cleaning up after the storm. Mrs. Rodriguez waved from her window, and the young couple with twin babies who lived on the first floor called out to ask if Maria's family needed anything. The storm seemed to have brought out the best in everyone, reminding people that they all faced the same challenges and needed to look out for each other. That afternoon, "Mr. Harrison, what are you doing here? Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," James said with a warm smile. "I just wanted to check on your family and make sure everyone was doing well after last night. And I brought a few more things that I thought might be helpful. The box contained warm clothes in the children's sizes, including heavy winter coats, boots, and gloves. There were also some books for Sophia, coloring books, and crayons for Pedro, and soft toys for baby Carmen. At the bottom of the box, Maria found an envelope with her name written on it in James's careful handwriting. "You didn't need to do this," Maria said, though she was deeply touched by his continued generosity. "You've already..." "You're clearly a hard worker and a responsible person. I could use help at the ranch, and this would give you a chance to earn steady income while your husband is looking for work in the city." Maria stared at the application, hardly believing what she was seeing. "You're offering me a job? But I don't know anything about horses or ranch work." "I can teach you what you need to know," James said. "The most important qualifications for this job are reliability, willingness to work hard, and care for animals. Based on what I've seen of how you care for your children, I'm confident you have all of those qualities. The job offer represents..." Your children would have their own rooms, and Sophia would be able to attend the excellent school district that serves the rural area around the ranch. Maria felt tears starting to flow down her cheeks. The offer was so generous, so life-changing, that she could hardly comprehend it. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do all this for strangers?" James was quiet for a moment, looking out at the snow-covered street. "20 years ago, I was going through the worst time of my life," he said finally. "My wife had just died in a car accident, my daughter was only 10 years old, and I was struggling to keep the ranch running while grieving and trying to be a single parent." He paused, lost in the memory. A neighbor family. When you have the ability to help someone who's struggling, you have a responsibility to do it. Not because you expect gratitude or recognition, but because that's how communities survive and thrive. As they talked, Sophia appeared at the apartment window, having woken up from her nap. When she saw James's truck, she ran downstairs with Pedro close behind her. The children were excited to see their new friend again, and they listened with wide eyes as Maria explained about the job offer and the possibility of moving to the ranch. "Would we really get to live near the horses?" Pedro asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Would I be able to help take care of them?" Sophia added hopefully. James laughed at their enthusiasm. Sophia was reading one of the books James had brought. Pedro was cuddling with his new stuffed horse, and baby Carmen was sleeping peacefully in warm pajamas. "Mama," Sophia said quietly as Maria turned off the camping lantern, "do you think Papa will be happy about Mr. Harrison helping us?" Maria considered the question carefully. She hoped Roberto would understand that accepting James's help didn't mean she had given up on their marriage or their family. It simply meant she had chosen to provide stability and security for their children when they needed it most. I think Papa will be grateful that someone took care of his family when he couldn't be here to do it himself, Maria said finally. And